Good afternoon. I am overjoyed to see the great crowd in front of us, and I welcome you to our second lecture in the series on designing the futures of the university. We're delighted to have a guest to join us, who is Susan Hockfield, the 16th president of the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. She was the first woman and first life scientist to hold the title of president of MIT. And we're doubly proud to note that she's an alumna of the Georgetown University School of Medicine, getting her PhD in 1979. This will be a conversation between Professor Hockfield and our president, Jack DeGioia, a give and take with questions posed back and forth, undoubtedly. And then we'll open it up for your questions and dialogue among us. So I'm delighted to welcome you here, and we all look forward to this conversation.
Thanks very much, Bob. Thank you very much. Susan, welcome. It's an incredible privilege to have this opportunity to be with you. We've had a chance to talk a little bit in anticipation of being with you all today. One of the underlying assumptions that has been guiding our work in this project on the futures of the university is a recognition that while we're facing some of the most disruptive threats in the history of higher education, this is an unprecedented moment of new things coming at us. We also think it's a moment of incredible opportunity, and if universities can find the best way to organize themselves to respond, we might be able to do some really extraordinary things. Now, I know this is a sensibility that you share, and I'd love to hear how you thought about that, how you embraced that during your years running MIT.
Yeah, well, thank you. And during my time at Yale as a faculty member and dean and provost, I'm thrilled to be here, and I just can't thank you enough for inviting me to participate in this conversation. I had a chance to read your president's opening piece on the challenges for the university, and it's brilliant, insightful, and raises so many questions that are near and dear and terrifying to all of us. Change is a hard thing. One of the faculty members at MIT said something to me just as I was starting. He said, well, people are people. Somehow I had imagined that the MIT faculty would be different. And they are different in some ways, but the human brain in general resists change. And we have to, all of us, balance our change aversion with the extraordinary appetite that we all have for the new. And I think there's so many wonderful things about the university, and we'll touch on, I think, many of them as we go forward, but managing change in an institution that is 150 years old, hundreds of years old if we think of the university in aggregate, I think is a very critical issue. And I feel very strongly, you talk to people in business, and as the president of a university, they look at you with a very long face and say, oh my goodness, how do you manage all those prima donnas? How do you, somehow that the faculty is our opposition. The faculty is the leadership. And how do we use the faculty leadership to guide a university forward? And the truth is that we appoint and tenure our faculty because they're the leaders in their field, and they can see beyond the boundaries of the known with greater acuity than you or I could from the president's office. I mean, what do we know? We might know our field, but that rapidly goes away because you're not paying attention to your field, so we really don't know about the future of any field. And so to use the faculty's skills in looking into the future and persuade them to think beyond their own disciplines is actually a very hard thing. But I learned from my great academic leadership mentor, Rick Levin, who was president of Yale when I was dean and provost, that the way to work at the challenges of the university, the opportunities of the university, is to convene groups of faculty, but unusual groups of faculty. So President Levin was a genius at finding people across the university community asking them to come together to puzzle about the most important challenges for the university. And these groups would come back with, unsurprisingly, things we had never really thought of. The things we had thought of, we would, tell them about and, ask them to, mull through those. But it was such an incredible lesson of how to use the intellect and the creativity of the faculty to solve the problems of the university. And the thing, again, that struck me was that every time we convened a committee to ponder an important problem, it was a different set of people. Maybe, a third had been on a committee like that before and the rest were new. And how exciting to bring these ideas into the conversation. And I think it's absolutely essential because last thing you want in a university is a kind of, monotonicity in how you think. The great thing about the university is we've got this extraordinary diversity of intellect. Yeah. And to put those intellects to the task of imagining the future of the university, as you clearly are doing here, I think is incredibly valuable and fun.
I want to pick up on the range of experiences that you had. So you were at Yale as a faculty member, as dean of the graduate school, as provost. You moved to MIT as president. These are very different kinds of institutions. So in 1828, the Yale Report basically established the foundation for liberal education. It wrote the blueprint, really, for how we think about liberal education in the United States. 35 years later or so, MIT has created very different kind of blueprint for the kind of institution that MIT would be and the kinds of contributions it would try to make as a university. What were the differences for you in these two different institutions?
I often talk about Yale and MIT as reciprocal institutions. I mean, I didn't know this when I accepted the presidency of MIT. It would be hard to imagine two institutions that were more different than Yale and MIT, but I have to say, what I appreciate now is this is one of the greatest strengths of American higher education, is the diversity of institutions. And to imagine somehow that we're all doing the same thing, or we're all doing the same thing in the same way, is just ludicrous. And so the freedom that each institution has to imagine itself is wonderful. And if you compare the success of American higher education to any other nation, I think much of that success comes from this autonomy. And even though we're different, we compete fiercely with one another. It's not that MIT and Yale don't compete on certain playing fields. We certainly do. But it is a great benefit. And so, so Yale did write the blueprint for liberal arts education. In many ways, MIT wrote the blueprint for science and engineering education with liberal arts. People forget that MIT has adamantly liberal arts. But the style of education and the purpose of the university at MIT is very different from that imagined by Yale. So at the heart of Yale is the humanities and social sciences. At the heart of MIT is science and engineering. Create very different cultures with different assumptions, different ways of approaching problems. But I think one of the other fascinating things for me, if you look at the history of higher education in America, Harvard, Brown, Princeton, Yale, these schools were all begun as divinity schools because what the new nation needed was ministers. And that was what universities, colleges then were for. And it's important when you're in that line of work to have a separation between the real world and the world of the mind. And so there is a sense of the ivory tower and a place removed from the rigors of daily life. MIT, founded in 1865, its premise was we needed a new kind of university to accelerate the industrialization of America. The Industrial Revolution was happening. We weren't educating anyone who could lead these industries. Agriculture needed to step up the game because, as now, everyone was worried there wouldn't be enough food. And we needed to help farmers design more productive agricultural practices. Sounds a little familiar. And so the whole land grant movement happened in order to provide the kind of education that the new nation needed. And MIT very much in leadership. So this idea about hands-on learning, that there would be laboratories where you'd actually get your hands wet making stuff. This was new. So one of the themes at MIT is learning by doing. We really mean learning by doing. And what I often say about MIT is MIT was designed to do tech transfer. That was one of the fundamental principles of MIT's education, meaning engaging the real world in real time, in real ways. So very different from the premise of Ivy League institutions. So, I mean, I just find this whole thing absolutely fascinating and exciting in the sense of all of the many different ways you can look at higher education. Now, I mean, it's inside baseball. You and I can appreciate that, but most people just think of college as college as college, university as university, but it really isn't. Yeah. And I think that is one of our nation's great strengths.
I want to pick up on a theme embedded in your comments regarding place. Under your leadership, you took open courseware, one of the great gifts that MIT gave to the world, and turned that into MIT X, which became edX with the joint commitment of Harvard. And we were very fortunate to be invited early in to be a member of the consortium on edX. But embedded in that is a tension between the importance of place and the role that technology can play in this moment in enhancing the quality of the things that occur on our campuses. You know, we built this building just a few years ago. It really has made a big difference in terms of the interactions that take place here. There are things that just didn't happen until we built this place. I know there's some fantastic locations on the MIT campus where without that, I think I remember reading something you read where you wrote where you're talking about creating the opportunities for people to bump into one another. Place matters, and yet we're all engaged in this new technology revolution. How do you think about that balance?
Yeah, so important questions, fascinating questions. So truth be told, you know, what was in my mind, my predecessor, unfortunately the recently late Chuck Vest, started OpenCourseWare, and it was just getting started when I arrived. I sure didn't understand it until I got to MIT, and then I was kind of stunned by the power, the potential of OpenCourseWare. But a couple things. So OpenCourseWare started, MIT started a distance learning collaboration with Singapore about the same time, teaching a course in real time to a classroom at MIT and one 12 hours away, 12 hours time zone away in Singapore. And what we saw was that every time, virtually every time, a faculty member put her or his material or, you know, the course on OpenCourseWare, they discovered a new way to teach. The faculty who participated in the Singapore-MIT Alliance, this distance learning, you know, distance and present learning, similarly told me that they changed the way they taught. And what was revealed to me is that we can't just ask our faculty to invent new pedagogical tools, you know, just go do it, right? Without giving them laboratories. So OpenCourseWare and SMA, MIT X edX, yeah, I think the most important contribution they make is changing the way we teach for our students. So the faculty who changed the way they teach for OCW wasn't just for OCW, they changed the way they taught in the classroom. And so I think this is a little appreciated centerpiece of these new teaching technologies. Look, our students are arriving born mobile, born digital, and to imagine that they will be compelled by the same kind of teaching technologies that have compelled students for hundreds of years, I think is wishful thinking. And frankly, if we don't use new technologies to improve our pedagogy, to enhance it, to make it more compelling, I mean, there are any number of ways you can think of making it better, you know, is a disservice. And so all of these new ways of teaching, new ways of conveying information, I think at its heart are laboratories for new pedagogies, enormously valuable. A side product is the materials available to anyone in the world, and that's fantastic. When OCW started, there was, of course, a lot of concern about the erosion of the, you know, MIT brand. You know, why would people come to campus if they could do OCW? More people wanted to come to campus following OCW. So they're two very different kinds of learning, but I am, so persuaded by place, by the power of people coming together. I call this the magic. The magic happens. The magic happens when you have a group of incredibly gifted, brilliant people sitting around a table puzzling over some problem. And the magic is someone will have an idea that she or he would not have had on their own. That's the magic. And so far, the digital technologies are great. I'm not sure you actually get all of that. And so I think that in-person education is going to continue to be compelling. It's going to continue. We're not going to be put out of business anytime soon. So what happened with OpenCourseWare, and I was president during the first 8 years of OpenCourseWare, applications to MIT doubled. Not because I was president, but because this material was out there and people were aware of what MIT was doing and they wanted to be part of it. And I think that'll continue. But on the other hand, I'm so moved by the resource that we give the world. I'm so moved. There have been 150 million people who have used OpenCourseWare, and the emails that we've gotten from people, and the same on MITx and edX. I'm sure you get the same kind of messages from people who could not have dreamed of having access.
Yeah.
Truth be told, there have been libraries for a long time, and they could get the textbooks from the libraries if they wanted. But this has...
It's a dynamic experience.
Yeah, it's a wonderful experience.
Yeah. Let's continue that a little bit, because I think embedded in what you're describing is part of what we do as universities is contribute to the public good. Mm-hmm. And the knowledge that's created is shared. We give this out, we make it available, we share it widely. OpenCourseWare and now edX are different ways in which we can make the knowledge that's created in our contexts more of a public good. You mentioned a moment ago that MIT was created to do tech transfer. Mm-hmm. Is there a tension between our responsibilities to create public goods and the market forces that are ever more powerful in impacting our institutions?
Oh, is there a tension? There a little bit, but not. I would say one of the things that surprised me, at Yale, there was a lot more concern about that tension. And then I got to MIT, I said, what were we worried about? This works out just fine if you have appropriate policies and practices. And so you have to, obviously, you got to be careful in any of these things that you do. In this question of the public good, I think it's a fascinating question. And what is it that we do in the public good? It's what the university does. We, create new knowledge through research. We disseminate new knowledge through teaching and publications. We preserve knowledge in our collections, but also, frankly, in our scholars, in the heads of, and the activities of our scholars. And these are all to the public good. Now, there's this marvelous paradox that while you're studying the thing that you love, you are creating a public good. And that's, win-win. And I think one of the things that I'm most worried about is not that universities don't contribute sufficiently to the public good as universities. Frankly, I'm much more worried about our societal standards and our societal norms that I think at a perverse level encourage people to use things for their private good. And I just described this marvelous paradox that you get private good and public good. But, I think the pendulum has shifted toward a privileging of the private good and away from the public good. And I don't think that's the universities. I think that is a huge social problem in terms of how we value what people do and who they are. That goes well beyond. I don't think the university is the problem there.
Right. Right. Let's take that out a little bit broader than just our context, in the sense that you mentioned the partnership you've had with Singapore. I don't think there's another university in the world that's achieved more global outreach, a more global network than what MIT has been able to do. How do you think about managing knowledge and and learning and the exchange of ideas across geographies.
Right. So MIT has partnerships in not a huge number of places, a small number of places, but they're partnerships. One of the things, again, that I learned when I got to MIT is the value in having partnerships to build something in a place, but not setting up a satellite of MIT. So MIT has no satellites. We just don't. We have a research enterprise in Singapore that sits side by side with one of our educational activities. But MIT is much more interested in building capacity for them than we are having an MIT site. I learned this from the MIT Sloan School, our business school, that there is not an MIT Sloan School anywhere else in the world, but everyone was racing to China when I started as president. And what Sloan had done was they established these partnerships with 4 Chinese business schools rather than setting up MIT Sloan in one place. And the pattern is to bring faculty from those 4 Chinese business schools to Sloan, have them take the classes, teach with the faculty, establish research collaborations, and then go home and deploy what they learned in their home context. What do we know about teaching in China? Like nothing, right? But we're happy to share what we know, and this is the spirit of open courseware. We are happy to share what we know with you and help you build what you think is going to be the very best school institution for your country. You know, there's another very interesting thing. One of the hard things about establishing excuse me, activities is how do you get the faculty to go there? You know, every country wants your faculty to be teaching there. Wow, that's really hard. I want my faculty to be teaching here. You know, I want our students, you know, to experience our faculty. But what this, I think a really important element is the, you know, you and I have talked about this, is the, I think, inseparable bond between education and research. And so, you know, for some of our faculty, they'll go to Singapore because there's a new educational opportunity, but at MIT, frankly, not so much. They'll go to Singapore if there's a research opportunity that they can't access in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And so all of our collaborations offered research opportunities to our faculty that you just couldn't do in Cambridge, Massachusetts. So Singapore, I mean, our programs in Singapore are research programs. I'll give you one example that you just couldn't do in Cambridge. So when I arrived, opposite the president's house, which is right on the Charles River, is the sailing pavilion. And, you know, we went out to look at the boats and take a boat out. And there were people there with these big yellow, what looked like torpedoes. Whoa, this is a little scary. These ended up to be underwater autonomous vehicles that the group who does ocean engineering at MIT was developing and using the Charles River as the test bed. I mean, that's cool. You know, the Charles River is not so interesting. I think it's only, you know, 7 feet, 8 feet deep, and it's pretty flat. I mean, you know where the boundaries are.
You can't get hurt.
Well, if you touch the bottom, you can get hurt because of the pollutants, but yeah, it's very hard to get lost. Sometimes these UAVs would get lost, but you can find them, right? I mean, it's not, yeah, it's not a big problem. But a good place to start.
Right.
But Boston Harbor is a much more interesting place, but, you know, the powers that be were not all that interested in the MIT faculty running UAVs in the Boston Harbor, but Singapore was. So the group developing these UAVs has an astonishing research program running these UAVs in the Singapore Harbor, very difficult terrain, fascinating problems, real life problems. And so weren't they excited to do that? And, you know, they get involved, they're doing some teaching. I mean, it's research and education that's going hand in hand in ways that, you know, it's just one of the most marvelous features of the research university.
Yeah. So this is a framing question for us as we wrestle with this moment in higher education, and that is, what do we protect and hold on to, and where do we need to experiment, innovate, adapt, in some new ways. And in some reflections that I shared with the faculty, I talked about the sort of inextricable character of the university, where we engage in the formation of our students, they provide for the inquiry of our faculty, and we contribute to the common good of our communities. You captured it just a moment ago in the inextricable link that you just described too. What should we be so rigorous about protecting, and where should we be open to innovation?
Well, the fact is, in this research education nexus, it is just chock-a-block with innovation. So universities are criticized. I mean, there are ways we should probably change more rapidly. The fact is, we change really rapidly in ways that people just kind of don't ignore because the buildings are old. You know, we've got lecture rooms. You know, always like, well, what's being taught in the lecture rooms is very different from what was being taught 25 years ago. You know, most of the people I know who are in positions of academic leadership have degrees in fields that didn't exist 20 years before they got those degrees. How does that happen so fast? You know, in our research domain, we are always changing as fast as possible. You know, in fact, sometimes we get the direction wrong. You know, over time it'll correct. And I certainly wouldn't necessarily be able to say what direction was right or wrong for an architecture department. I mean, how would I know? I'm a neuroscientist. At this point, I can't even tell for a neuroscience department what direction is right or wrong, because I've been away from the frontier. So the things I think we need to protect, I am so in awe of what you brilliantly capture as formation. So young people come to our campus, and they have experiences that, in very important ways, allow them to become who they will be. We don't know who that is. Our faculty come to our campuses with a research program and some idea of what they think they might want to do, with no real idea of where they're going to be. And so we have to preserve this kind of open-ended approach to the future. And you know, as we mentioned before we came in, I'm a big fan of all of this online digital education. It provides resources for people around the world, but it's only a piece of what we do. And you know, whether it will be able to evolve as rapidly as a classroom evolves. You know, it's very expensive to get these courses online, as you know. Yes. Will we be able to change them every year, every 2 years, every 5 years? Will we be able to, will the online world have greater alacrity than we've had in the in-person lecture room world? I don't know. Yeah. But I think this business of being in formation is the thing that we do best, and the thing that happens and that we preserve best. And understanding what that is, defining what that is, has to be what the university continues to deliver to the world.
Thank you. Let's open this up. We've got some time for questions from the audience. I think we have microphones. The problem I have is I can't see a single human being here. So
can't see a hand.
So please introduce yourselves.
Yeah, I'm an emeritus professor.
I know that voice. So.
Yeah, I'm an emeritus professor, but also a human being.
This is Norman Birnbaum.
If a senior academic citizen can be permitted a reminiscence, when I was a graduate student in sociology at Harvard, I had the great good fortune to participate in the first round of general education courses. And I had an age mate, a colleague, who was a graduate student in physics, and he was teaching in James Conant's Science for Non-Scientists. And he complained to me that his teachers in physics were continually harassing him to drop that kind of stuff, no use, get back into the laboratory. His name was Thomas Kuhn. So the interesting question is whether the sciences today, and MIT I know has a very strong liberal arts and social sciences component, whether in the education of scientists, these larger philosophical, moral, and historical questions play a role?
Yeah, so it's a great, and I think a very important question. The MIT curriculum is actually a little antediluvian in that we have a core. We have a core curriculum. Every student takes 6 prescribed science courses, or you take or pass out of them. AP doesn't count. You've got to actually pass out of the material. But every MIT student has to take 8 courses in the humanities, arts, and social sciences. And so your question to me is not whether it's important to engage the great philosophic, ethical, moral issues of the day. I think we need to. But where does that happen? And to require physicists to do that work, some physicists should be involved, is kind of one approach. Or is it the faculty in the philosophy department who should be doing that work? And my answer actually is, how do we create structures that allow physicists and philosophers to actually have conversations that can, in those conversations, we don't know what the answers are, of course, but provide the context for educating our students to pay attention to these things. How do we give our students the foundational knowledge so that they can understand the importance of the questions and participate in conversations in searching for the answers? I think this is absolutely essential, and as I say, I'm now, Yale is not antediluvian in its requirements for undergraduates, and I have shifted to, frankly, the belief that giving our students better direction about what they will need would be better for them than the direction that many universities have gone, which is, whatever the heck you want is fine, you make up your own world. I think that for a number of reasons, core curricula are great. Something I didn't know, it took me a couple years to understand this, of course, having come out of a school where there wasn't a core. When I arrived at MIT, I asked, in my effort to learn about the place, I would ask the students, what do you love most about MIT? And the most frequent answer was, I just love it that everyone's so smart. Great answer, but I had been at a place where everyone was really smart too, but they never said that. But what I realized is that having a core curriculum, the 6 science courses, gives all MIT students a common vocabulary. So they can have conversations with anyone, whether after the 6 science courses you're studying architecture or chemistry or mechanical engineering. Doesn't make any difference because you have a way of communicating with one another, so you know that someone is smart. As at Yale, if you're majoring in comparative literature or chemistry, you don't know where even to start the conversation because you don't have the assurance that someone has the same set of knowledge. So I think that's a kind of a side product of a core curriculum, but I think directionally, I think it's just very important for us to provide our students, frankly, with more guidance rather than less guidance in terms of what is fundamental to the life they will be living.
Thank you. If you come to the microphones, we can see the microphone, so please introduce yourself.
I'm Alex. I am a senior at Georgetown University, and I'm currently working with a course that is attempting to envision what a school like Georgetown will be like in 20 years. You mentioned that there is constant change within individual classrooms, but I would love to pick your brain about how you can see a general shift in thinking from entire student bodies and faculty and even administrators 20 years in the future, or maybe 10 years in the future.
Yeah, well, the future is kind of fuzzy. And I always say, 5 years out, I can see it with some clarity. After that, it gets, really fuzzy and out of focus. But I think that the most important thing in terms of taking care of what's 20 years from now is these practices of the mind, the practices of the university that we have to preserve. And this is what the president was asking. So, what must we not lose? And so we must not lose, or what must we amplify, any way to encourage faculty to think anew about their subjects. Give them opportunities to teach in new ways. Some of them will pick them up, some of them won't, but just to create a culture or maintain a culture, amplify the culture of discovery and innovation, both in teaching and in research. You know, it's kind of take off the shackles. I mean, so that's what's most important, because I can't say where chemistry is going to be, how chemistry is going to be taught in 20 years. There's no way for me to know that. But what I do know is bringing the best faculty to the campus and bringing the best students to a campus, and I'll come back to what best means, is absolutely the first thing you've got to do in order to assure your future. Now, best is an interesting question, because best is not the same everywhere. And I'm a big believer, it was really reinforced, and you'll have this joy soon, when we did college visits. My daughter is a senior in college, but it was so fun to go on these college tours. Happily, you know, I was able to do most of these anonymously. And my daughter was a little impatient with me, because I was like taking notes everywhere I went, saying, oh, this is so interesting. Trying not to be the person who asked the most questions. It was just a stealth mission for how to make MIT better. But the thing that impressed me again was every campus was different. Every campus has its own personality. Every campus weights different subjects and different activities, different experiences in different ways. And so what's best for one campus is not going to be best for another campus. And so I think understanding what a campus's strengths are and how you amplify on that through understanding what other schools are doing and not mimicking it, but using that knowledge to get better. So best for a campus is where the match between who the students are and what their ambition is and who the faculty are and what their ambition is really what creates the magic, because then you have communities that can talk to one another and will invent a future that's just better than the present.
And if I could just brag on your behalf, your daughter did find a good match, because some of you may know, at the end of last semester, Professor Hockfield's daughter was selected as one of the 32 American Rhodes Scholars for this class. So, please introduce yourself.
Dr. Hockfield and President DeGioia. My name is Bibi Albernaz. I'm a senior in the college studying English and philosophy. And sort of on the note of maintaining and preserving the personality or the sort of dimensions and the nature of each university, here at Georgetown, for example, we have such a rich Jesuit tradition that we're steeped in those kinds of values. And I think in thinking of modernity and research and progression, we can still maintain an anchor by tying that to the traditions that where we started from. You know, you mentioned that some of these higher education schools started as divinity schools. So I'm wondering if you could touch a bit more on how we can work with the idea of modernity that remains anchored to some kind of traditional values as well.
Yeah, so I'm a huge fan of the past, as much as I am a fan of the future. And I think, you know, just in terms of the balance on our campuses, you know, things swing not just back and forth and side to side in all kinds of directions. I think one of the important roles of the university is the preservation of knowledge. And I said the preservation of knowledge happens not just in our collections, but also in our faculty. And you know, while particular disciplines may not be the height of fashion, it's very important for universities to try their best, to preserve those academic traditions. And I am a big fan of 2,000 years ago, 4,000 years ago, and having that be the foundation of where the future is going to be. And I guess I can say this kind of thing because I'm not president anymore. I just think we are neglecting the past too much these days. And so I would only encourage Georgetown to continue to be well anchored, well rooted in the past. We like to think of people who lived 1,000 years ago as somehow stupid. No, they were actually, our brains have not changed very much, let's just say. We've added a lot of data, but there is just tremendous interest, knowledge, wisdom in studies of the past.
Thank you. Please introduce yourself.
Irene Jolson, professor at the School of Nursing and Health Studies. And given our interest in cross-campus collaboration, I also teach in the School of Medicine and School of Foreign Service. So you spoke about engagement and partnerships with other countries in research and education. And I wonder if you could speak specifically to the role that you believe universities can play in science diplomacy. So specifically in engaging with countries that are not, with which we do not normally have positive relationships or very strong relationships. So to do it in a proactive way.
Yeah, really, really important question. And I wouldn't call it science diplomacy, I call it academic diplomacy, an incredibly powerful tool. So one of the things that, again, we don't talk about when we think about, what America is doing around the world, what we've done is brought people from all over the world to the United States for some piece of their education, whether it's 6 months or 12 months or, or 6 years. They then go home with a wonderful understanding of how we do things here. Some of it is adopted, some not. It is the most powerful form of diplomacy and basically good feelings, usually. Similarly, sending Americans, around the world to, study, to do research, to engage in, local projects is very important. So I think it's really critical. And if I had a magic wand to tell Washington what to do, I would say put another $1 billion into student exchanges. There's no better way to secure a peace in our future than to increase this travel between U.S. and other countries. MIT, a couple years ago, decided to engage in one of these collaborations, capacity building in Russia, in Skolkovo, the kind of imagined techno center, techno city just outside of Moscow. And that was a hard decision for us for all kinds of political reasons. Frankly, when MIT decided to get involved in Singapore was before I was president, and there was a lot of concern because Singapore had a lot of policies that were just pretty distasteful. But our view is, if we can get involved, there's a chance that we can influence the direction of the country's evolution. And maybe not, but it's a wonderful way to try. And so if we're going to wait for countries to be just like the United States before we get involved, we'll never be involved anywhere. And so I think getting the voice, not to say that MIT or the United States is going to dictate what Singapore becomes, but to be a presence there and to have because basically by walking the talk, by showing them how we do things, to influence the way the country evolves, I think is a very important contribution, important effort, and we're not always successful. But I think we've decided, MIT has decided to get involved in a lot of difficult places before it was going to be very comfortable or even very friendly.
And fortunately, the Department of State supports some of this.
Yes.
So Georgetown has had projects with the Department of State vis-a-vis Iran. Mm-hmm. In areas as diverse as bioethics and science. So
yeah.
This is important. Thank you.
But they're complicated, and this is not to say that it's not a headache for the president. It can be.
Please.
Hi. Hi, I'm Kent Carlson. I'm a senior in the SFS. Thank you for
sorry.
School of Foreign Service.
Thank you very much.
Yes. So I want to go back to talking about tradition a little bit and sort of how we not only talk about it within a university setting, but also with the nation. Because I think there can be a lot of talk at a university about where our values come from and how it's important to preserve them and how we think that they're important. But a lot of the changes going on are outside forces on the university. So what do you think is the university's role, and how do you think the university can go about convincing the rest of the world that this tradition, these past values, these disciplines that aren't necessarily in fashion, still have value in the greater context of higher education?
A difficult but very good question. And I think that one of the things that, certainly in my field, we didn't pay a lot of attention to is in neuroscience until, I was, had already established my lab, and all of a sudden there was a big pressure to be public spokespeople for what we did. And it's part of the public good. So universities are not monasteries that live into and of themselves. I think that each of us needs to make a serious effort to communicate what we do to the rest of the world in ways that they can understand it. And I think to make the argument that it matters, whatever you're studying, is part of the responsibility, and it's part of our commitment to the public good, is helping people understand why it matters. Why should people care about the thing that we're studying? So that's part of it. I want to just add a little kind of footnote about tradition and culture. It's not all good, and it is a difficult conversation to have, deciding what part of the culture, what part of the tradition it's time to leave behind. And we don't want to be trapped in the past. We don't want to look and act and be exactly the way we were 5 years, 10 years, 50 years ago. But it is a very, very, I'd just say a tricky negotiation, a tricky decision-making to decide we've just got to let this stuff go because it's preventing us from moving forward. These are tough discussions at universities that are steeped in tradition, but at some point, there are departments that go away. Tough decisions, but decisions that absolutely have to be taken because the universities are criticized often of being able to add but not subtract. And for a lot of reasons, the physical constraints of space and dollars prevent us from simply adding. And so I think this, understanding not what the performance of the tradition is and that you adhere to that mindlessly, but what the core belief, the foundational value of a tradition is, and figuring out how to keep that, and perhaps following the spirit of the tradition rather than the letter of the tradition. But you all understand that debate
Thank you.
better than most, I would say. Yeah.
Thank you. Please.
My name is Bill Kunzik. I'm a retired lawyer, and I'm here at Georgetown as a student, actually, in the very wonderful graduate liberal studies program that we have here. Shout out for that. So I'm attempting to get a master's degree in liberal arts right now. This is a question that I actually heard some years ago in a meeting like this with another university president, and I thought it was very good, and I thought it provides some insights to the future. So I'd like to ask it of both of you. What is the single specific thing that, in your case, kept you up at night, and in your case, keeps you up at night in this job that you have?
Go ahead.
We had a wonderful event the other night at an alum's house who has been at the heart of the tech sector from the very beginning. He's currently chair of Groupon. He was one of the leaders of America Online. His name is Ted Leonsis, and he owns our local sports franchises. He's a member of our board of directors. And he commented to the audience that we were with that he and I have been in these conversations for more than 2 decades. And he would bring these various ideas, usually these killer threats that, and so I mentioned at the time that Ted is regarded as a disruptor. For me, he's just disrupted a lot of sleep over the years. But more importantly, I think honestly the challenge that we wrestle with, it's been embodied and embedded in some of the questions and some of the work that has been characterizing this project over the last few months and as we go forward. How do we protect what is most important about what we are, but accelerate the rate of change in a way that is a bit uncomfortable for us? We know that there's only one way we're going to get to where we need to get to, and that is together. But our normal rate of change, our normal pace of change in the university context may be a mismatch right now for some of the threats that we're confronting. And so the way I sometimes describe it with colleagues around the office and around conference tables and the like is we can't get better fast enough in some really important ways. And the challenge is to try to make sure we're doing that so that we're all getting there together.
But an element of that is we're not all going to agree. We're going to move before we all agree, which is very difficult for the university. But you got to do it, and you all have to kind of agree. One of the things that I discovered, when I discovered that people were as change averse at MIT as people are, I realized there was something else marvelous about MIT is that while people don't like change, no one can deny you an experiment. And then I thought, wow, that's how you do things anyway. It's so let's do an experiment. Let's try this, and if it doesn't work, we'll try something else. But this whole sense of being light on your feet, and that's at the core. I mean, that is at the core of the university, and somehow we forget that the core of the university is discovery, it's innovation, and we need to be that way about the institution itself, not just about what each of us studies. In terms of what kept me up, there's not a lot of time to sleep, and so during my 5 hours, I could sleep. But the truth be told, one of the amazing privileges of being a university president is you touch hundreds of thousands of things and hundreds of thousands of people, and there are dozens and dozens of problems. And so any little thing, and so your day, the big effort is to get beyond the thing that's keeping you up today to the thing that's keeping you up, over months. There isn't any one thing that kept me up, but this issue of how you move into the future, I think, is the most important responsibility of a university president. And the most vexing.
Yeah, thank you. Please introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Alyssa Huberts, and I'm an undergraduate here. I'm a senior in the School of Foreign Service. Thank you both for being here. I was really glad to hear you guys touch a little bit on global engagement and science diplomacy, and engagement is a buzzword up here on this nice banner we have printed. But I'd love to hear a little more about community engagement. And something that I've been really proud and excited about my school about the past 4 years is the way that Georgetown has started to open up those conversations about what is our role in DC and in our community. And I'd love to hear what happens at MIT with Cambridge, what happened at Yale with New Haven, and sort of what is the university's role. We talk so much about place, but I think that our place extends beyond just our campus.
Thank you.
Yeah. So there is increasing engagement of universities with their communities, and communities are demanding more of universities, usually in terms of dollars. And I think that one of the incredible values of engaging is, I kind of draw this cartoon of MIT being founded to do tech transfer. That is a very important way in which MIT has engaged with the community in Kendall Square. I mean, the place is littered with companies that have spun out of MIT, or companies that, actually have MIT faculty or students as their heads. That's one kind of engagement. But I think, in my mind, you have to think about the most important responsibilities of the university are education and research. And the engagements in our community have to be configured in ways that our students and faculty actually learn. It's not just do-gooding. Do-gooding is fine, and I'm happy for universities to give our students and faculty lots of opportunities to engage productively in our neighborhoods. And I think that's an important human responsibility. And I think it's a way that universities can teach that human responsibility, is providing opportunities and creating an ethos, an expectation that you will be generous with your time and with your money, in your communities. But I think that probably even more aligned with the university's mission of research and education is engaging in ways that allow our students to learn about themselves, to learn about their cities, and our faculty to pursue their research. And so I think simply to say that everyone should be, racing out, the university's primary responsibility is to engage in the community, I just don't think is right. I think the university's primary responsibility is to advance the research and education mission, and much of that can be done by interacting with our communities.
My name is Jeff Anderson, a professor in the School of Foreign Service in the Government Department. I want to start with a bit of a cushion or disclaimer, which is I'm going to ask what I think is a pretty gloomy question to two leaders, a current president and a former president, who've taken very brave and ethical stands on issues of the day. So please don't read into this question the notion that I don't think you're doing enough to change the world. But my question has to do, in a way, with changing the world. I worry that we're not going to be able to protect what's valuable in the university, in particular in a context of growing inequality and declining social mobility. And if those problems aren't addressed, do we have any hope of preserving what's valuable here? I worry that one response, which I've seen in some universities, is to mimic the auto companies, where you sell a luxury product like an Audi to those who can afford it, and you crank out the rabbits for the rest. And in a way, if you do that, you end up reinforcing the problems, not correcting it. So I'm just wondering what you think about these larger contextual problems, and is there anything one can do here in these little oases to reverse those trends? Thank you.
Yeah, let me just pick up on the car company. So one of my concerns about digital technologies, teaching technologies, is that residential education, as we do it, is enormously expensive. We've done a calculation at MIT that shows that it costs 2.5, maybe 3 times as much as tuition to educate every undergraduate. Very expensive, extraordinary experience. And then we've got this other domain now, which is online, and it's free. And I don't know if that's the rabbit Audi model, but my worry is it may be the rabbit Audi model, and if it is, that rabbit has to be gosh darn good. And it's one of the, for me, the excitements about edX and these new technologies. They are just so much better than getting a book out of the library. That is, I think one of my concerns is whether residential education, as we're currently thinking about it, is increasingly be the province of the, only those who can't afford the time, not just the cost. And MIT has been great about financial aid for decades and decades, making it possible for any student who we feel has the ability and ambition to succeed to come to the MIT campus. So let me just tell you 2 of my big worries about the United States. One has to do with academic ambition, and the other is immigration. So I'll start with immigration. Back in the conversation after the State of the Union speech, we are crazy. We are just crazy. So as recently as 15 years ago, maybe even 10 years ago, but certainly 15 years ago, if someone got a degree from Georgetown, someone from some other country came here for school, got a degree from Georgetown, from MIT, for most of them, their first choice of where they wanted to work would be to stay in the United States. And second choice was, a really distant second, because there weren't great opportunities elsewhere. And so they would put up with all the indignities of the US immigration system in order to stay. Guess what? There are great opportunities elsewhere. And I know from talking to MIT graduates, and my guess is it's probably true of Georgetown, maybe not as many, but most of the people who get degrees from MIT would love to stay in the United States. Second choice is a really good second choice now. And our immigration system is the same it was 15 years ago. So imagining these people will put up with the indignities of our immigration system and stay is just dumb. And so, I just think we've got to make it possible for talented people from around the world who want to stay in the United States after we've paid for their education, whether they paid half of the cost by paying tuition or not. I just think that really worries me about opportunity. But more seriously, I think a more serious issue to your question is academic achievement and academic ambition. It won't surprise you that I believe that education is the route to socioeconomic change. But, it's like the joke about how many psychiatrists does it take to change a light bulb? Only one, but the light bulb has to really want to change. Well, I mean, if 75 or 50% of the kids in the nation don't have an academic ambition, they don't come from homes that say, the first thing you got to do is do well in school, and then you can play soccer, and then you can play football. If as a nation we've departed from the idea of education as the route to a better life, we are lost. And I don't know any way to fix it. We can, push in the schools, and, do everything I think we need to make our schools better. But my real worry is that as a nation, we have just, our values are so distorted that we will never solve the socioeconomic disparity problem if the people who we need to help don't buy in because of our social messages, what you see on TV. I mean, any number of places the messages don't understand that you got to help yourself. So I'm sorry, that's pretty depressing, but that's my worry.
I'm going to, Jeff, just pick up a little bit on your comments, because I would concur that inequality is the great fault line for our republic. And unless we as a nation take this on, and it really does require all of us to take this on. 2 weeks ago today, I had the privilege to attend a summit at the White House on access, affordability for higher education. And some of the themes that are very resonant with the question were in play in our conversation there. The current framework we're in right now is exacerbating inequality. But we know how to do this. And if you go back just roughly 60 some odd years ago, following the Second World War, we had a national consensus that we would have the greatest public institutions in the world for education. And we did that. But we were last number one in 1992. And right now we're probably somewhere around 14th. Most of new job creation, 2/3 of all new job creation in the United States requires some form of post-secondary education. But if you look at our 15-year-olds, let's start with 15-year-olds, 100 15-year-olds. Right now, we have the highest high school graduation rate in our lifetimes. Right now, it's at 75%. And that is a great achievement that a lot of people have been putting a lot of work in for a long time. But it does mean that 25 out of 100 15-year-olds never see the end of high school. And that future, without some form of post-secondary education for those 25 kids, is very, very difficult. Now, we have a tremendous penetration rate of our graduates of high school onto post-secondary. But we don't have a great completion rate. Roughly half of those who go on will finish a 2-year degree or more. So right now, roughly 40% of our eligible population has a 2-year degree or higher. Roughly a little under, right around 30% would have a 4-year degree. We as a nation can't compete if we're only ensuring that roughly 1/3 of our young people are getting the kind of education that they need. And the problem, really the core of the problem, 80% of all of education that takes place in post-secondary in the United States is in public institutions. We represent 2 private institutions, and and with our financial aid policies, our recruitment efforts, our outreach and the like, I think we have some things to be proud of. But we have to contribute to this national crisis of recommitting ourselves as a people to ensuring that our system of public education gets back to being number one in the world. And we are not doing the things that we need to do. Our policies are not going to enable that to occur by the end of this decade, which is the goal the president has established. We're just not moving in that direction. The states are not able to fund at the level that they need to. So we have real issues, and it matters to us because higher education is in the United States, is an incredible ecosystem where all the pieces play off of one another. We're that much stronger because of the great public institutions. But right now, the trajectory for them is not strong. And that's a piece we all have to contribute to. So I think we've got time for one more question. Please introduce yourself.
Bill Liccamelli. I'm a child psychiatrist who's trying to get people to change light bulbs on the clinical faculty here. And excellent discussion and insight into looking and designing the future. I wonder if you can comment on your experience at Yale and MIT. You mentioned bright faculty, getting them together. You mentioned the students and obviously administrators. What have you seen as the role or the potential role for alumni in this effort to design the future? Thank you.
Wow. Thank you. Interesting question and important question. And one of the reasons it's so important is the astonishing allegiance that alumni have for where they went to school. Astonishing. And why is that? Why is it that people, grown-ups, old people, continue to wear logo wear from their college? I mean, how crazy is that? Have they not had another experience? Did no one give them a free fleece with some other logo on? And I think it's because of this process of formation, of self-definition that happens in the context of an educational institution. So alumni want very much guard their institutions and want to have a voice in how those institutions evolve. Many alumni, so I don't know about your board, but MIT is a very large board, 75 members of the corporation. Not all of them, but most of them are alumni. So we give them a formal role in governance. MIT has 31 visiting committees that review every department, every academic and many non-academic activities. A third of the members of those visiting committees are alumni. So they have an assigned role in guiding the future of the institution in that way. I think formal ways are great. Informal ways are also important. The only thing the only reason why I would hesitate about the role of alumni, and of course, I don't know how many alumni how many alumni do you have?
About 160,000.
Yeah, we have 125,000. Yeah, so a lot of voice coming from a lot of different places, and having ways for them to be engaged is important. However, one caution, we've all seen this. So you are so fond of that candy store that was just down the street when you were a kid, and the candies that were sold were probably poisonous. Actually, we probably wouldn't be able to. But and when that candy store goes out of business and it becomes an Italian restaurant, you think, how could they do that? How could they get rid of the candy? Well, people don't go to candy stores anymore. They go to Italian restaurants. So there is a sense of nostalgia that alumni often feel that tie institutions to the past that often is not in the institution's best interest. And so, I've seen this, and it's just having alumni engagement is important in so many ways, but also can be difficult in other ways. One of the great roles for alumni, I can't tell you how important this was for me at MIT in understanding where MIT needed to change, where we really needed to change, was hearing from alumni what they didn't get. And so it won't surprise you that MIT is very focused on the right answer, and you do very well at MIT when you get the right answer. And surprise, our alumni, students would graduate, they go out into the real world, the right answer isn't enough. And MIT, frankly, hadn't prepared our students with the other skills that go along with making the right answer actually work in the real world. And so it was an enormous help to us in understanding how to amplify what we were currently teaching to provide our students with the skills they were going to need. So I think the alumni perspective on what the university does well at, but also what the university needs to do to prepare our graduates to have a greater impact in the world, I think is critically important. So need to be a voice. How you manage 165,000 voices, that's your job.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in expressing our appreciation to Susan Hockfield. Thank you.